What's up, guys? It's Joey, and we are back again for I think it's week 9 at this point. It feels like it's going so fast. But yes, we are week 9. Jets and Texans just played last night. We're over halfway through the fantasy football regular season, and I believe after this week, this will be halfway through the entirety of the fantasy season. So, Luke, first of all, how are your teams doing? What's your average right now? Are you looking good in most of your leagues? Are you kind of staying afloat, not doing as well as you hoped? What's your leagues looking like right now?
If I knew you were going to ask that, I would have checked for real. But
I like to catch you off guard.
Generally, I'm feeling good about my teams. I know in a bunch of the leagues we're in together, I'm doing pretty well. So you may think I'm actually doing better than I really am, because in some of the leagues we're not in together, I'm not so hot. Maybe my teams are just motivated to compete against you. But I started off, almost all of my leagues started off strong because I drafted Nico Collins in so many of them. Since he's been down, I've been sort of floating around 500. But I'd say definitely more winning records than losing records. Feeling good, especially getting Nico back soon.
Yeah, I think for my case, in all, because I'm in 11, 12, 13, I don't even know how many leagues at this point. The ones that I seriously keep up with like friends, family, and stuff like that, I think I'm a 4-4 or better in all of those leagues. There is one league that I'm doing really bad in, which is the people I play flag football with. I have a league with them, and my team is awful in that league. Other than that, 4-4 or better in about all of those leagues. So that's all you could really ask for. The draft night out league that we have in from the Fantasy Football Expo. I'm doing pretty bad in that one as well. But yeah, I know, yeah. But outside of those two, very, very confident about each one of my teams. So that's a good. And I had a good start last night, which we'll talk about in a minute. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, just want to remind you guys you can head over to Underdog, use code ANALYST, and they're going to match your first deposit up to $100. I believe there's also a $1,000 bonus for first-time signups as well going on right now, so definitely check that out. Now, Luke, last night's game, New York Jets versus Houston Texans. The first half was very sad. It was I think Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson both finished with 8 yards at the end of the first half, and they somehow both finished with much better numbers than that at the end of the game. So from the Jets side of the ball, a lot of what I saw in the second half was Aaron Rodgers slinging it. What I saw from the Jets defense in the second half was good pass rush. Hassan Reddick kind of making his presence known, getting the pressures that he needed to do. But for the most part, do you think that Aaron Rodgers is back? Like, is this vintage Aaron Rodgers? Because I feel like over the last couple weeks we've seen like, oh look, Aaron Rodgers is back, and then he disappears again. Like, oh look, this is the Rodgers that we know, and then he disappears again. I mean, 3 touchdowns. That's pretty damn good. So, what are your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers and this Jets offense moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I actually kind of would use the word back to describe Aaron Rodgers. I think he's actually been not bad this year. And after last week, or yesterday, that was a good performance. He certainly can't move like he used to, so I'm not going to say vintage Aaron Rodgers or anything. He's the oldest player in the league. He's really stuck in the pocket most of these games. So I don't know if it's vintage elite Aaron Rodgers. Certainly isn't. But he was a good quarterback yesterday, and I think he's actually been fairly good most of the season. I think really where the Jets have really, really disappointed is on the defensive side of the ball, actually. Going forward, I feel pretty good about the Jets, and the AFC is actually like really wide open. You have the Bengals with 2 wins, the Dolphins with a couple of wins, the Browns with 2 or 3 wins. All of these teams that we were expecting to be really good are not so good. And then you have teams like the Chargers, the Broncos, the Steelers who have winning records. Do we really think all those teams are going to make the playoffs? I'm not so sure about that. So I think there's a window for one of these teams. Again, the Jets, Cincinnati, Cleveland. Somebody's got to sneak in there. And I think the Jets have as good a shot as any of these other teams at making it.
As a Patriots fan, to see us potentially end the Jets season the week before, amazing. I was so happy about that. But I think you're right. I think like the momentum you have to build on this type of game. I mean, you got a long week before your next game. You really need to build on this win. Use this as a catalyst for the rest of the season if the Jets want any hope of getting into the playoffs. Having that 7th team able to get into the playoffs now definitely does help too. But from the Texans side of the ball, I mean, Joe Mixon stays consistent. He's, a top 3, I'd say. Is it weird? Is it bad to call Joe Mixon a top 3 running back? I mean, in every healthy game he's had, he's put over 15 points and over 20 in most of the games that he's had. But he's got to be a bona fide top 3 running back at this point. CJ Stroud also struggling, but again, that offensive line is terrible right now. And no Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs out for the season. It's not going to get easier for CJ Stroud in the foreseeable future. When Nico Collins returns, which I believe is week 11, things might lighten up, but for the most part, I'm staying away from CJ Stroud. But all right, now before we get into our players, I did just before we started doing this episode, I posted a story asking for questions for this week's matchups, just general fantasy advice. So we're going to run through a couple of these here. One being from, J.O. Hun. Kareem Hunt for Darnell Mooney. Is it worth it? Obviously, without knowing PPR, without knowing your league format and stuff like that, we'll just make the best educated guess that we can. Yeah, I'd say it's worth it. I mean, Kareem Hunt, you're trading for Darnell Mooney. Hunt, you'll probably get 1, maybe 2 weeks out of before Isaiah Pacheco returns. Darnell Mooney has been a consistent flex play the entire season, and depending on matchups, he can actually be what puts you over the top for that week. So I would say yes. I think getting Darnell Mooney in that trade is worth it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only slight hesitation I have is that there are so many more playable wide receivers than there are running backs right now for fantasy. But even so, I agree. I mean, Pacheco's coming back soon. I'm still kind of half expecting the Chiefs to try and make a play at another running back before the trade deadline or maybe in free agency just in case. Because Kareem Hunt is scoring touchdowns, but I feel like he's certainly not the old Chiefs Kareem Hunt. So, yeah, I do like Darnell Mooney. And, I mean, as you know, I'm going to get into Darnell Mooney a little bit later on in the show. But I think Mooney's a solid flex option going forward. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, this is not the Falcons offense that we're used to. We actually have multiple wide receivers that are being used. Next question here from Rafa Manzop. Okay. Is Jaden Reed a buy low right now? Is the question that's come up. I mean, low, yes. Are you buying? I don't know. I would really hope that Reed would kind of be the guy in this offense, but it just seems like sometimes it's Dobbs, sometimes it's Wicks, sometimes it's Reed, occasionally it's Watson. There's no bona fide wide receiver 1 in this offense. Jordan Love is banged up. I know Reed has been banged up a little bit too. So worth buying low on. If you can buy him low enough, sure. Are you buying him as if he's going to be giving you wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 numbers like he was early in the season? No. So that would be my thoughts. Are you in the same boat?
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with the buy low designation there. He's got to be a top 12 wide receiver still in fantasy, I would imagine. I don't think you can buy that very low. So it's certainly not a buy low, but I kind of agree that he was the guy in the beginning of the year. Now Watson's a little bit healthy. Romeo Dobbs seems to have gotten over whatever sort of arguments he was getting into with the front office and the staff there. And it just doesn't feel like Jordan Love has that guy like Rodgers had Devontae for all those years. The one target in the Packers offense that I weirdly have the most confidence in is Tucker Kraft. I wasn't expecting that coming into the year. I felt good about Luke Musgrave and what he showed to us last year, but Kraft has totally taken that role over. Musgrave's on IR now, and really Kraft has been a very solid tight end play most weeks. So he's actually the real guy that I want in that offense if I would consider buying anybody there.
Yeah, I just think this offense offers a lot of variance and not a lot of consistency, especially out of the running backs. And I think that's even true for the running. I mean, not out of the wide receivers, but I think that's especially true with the running backs too. Sometimes Jacobs, he's going to give you those big games, and other times he just disappears. And Emmanuel Wilson looks like the running back one on this team. So this offense is just filled with variance, and I'm sure it's something that LaFleur loves to do and just keep defenses guessing. So plays into who he is. Last question here that we'll do. Khalil Shakir or Josh Downs for the rest of the season. Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman have really kind of taken a step up with the addition of Amari Cooper. I hypothesized that Keon Coleman has done so because earlier in the season the Bills were not using Keon Coleman correctly. They were using him as a perimeter receiver. He's someone who really would thrive in a slot type role. And with the addition of Amari Cooper, they've been able to move Keon Coleman around a little bit more, give him better matchups, and he has been playing well. And I think the same can be said for Khalil Shakir, who has been acting as the team's wide receiver one. But if you put him against, number one coverage, he's not the type of guy that's going to beat that coverage. Amari Cooper, on the other hand, even if he's a decoy, I mean, you're leaving things wide open for Khalil Shakir. You're leaving things wide open for Keon Coleman. You're leaving things wide open for Dalton Kincaid. So I think Khalil Shakir should be a play for the rest of the season, kind of flex play similar to Darnell Mooney, as we mentioned before. But Josh Downs, who I'm going to go into a little bit later, and he's one of my players that I want to talk about. He is someone who I think could be a top 20 wide receiver for the rest of the season. And I'll go into that a little more later. So my pick between Shakir and Downs is going to be Downs. What about you?
Yeah, funny question because I'm actually going to get into this whole Bills situation a little bit later too. But I agree with you. I don't have the target numbers that we log every week on hands because I wasn't expecting this question. But Josh Downs has a lot of targets per game, a lot. And when Joe Flacco is playing, he might be top 5 in targets per game in the league. He's Joe Flacco's favorite target. Flacco has said as much in post-game interviews and press conferences. And when Flacco's in there, they throw the ball. Anthony Richardson's not been throwing the ball. And even when they do have Richardson throw the ball, his completion percentage is less than half most of the time. So now that he's benched and Flacco's in there, they claim for the rest of the year, Josh Downs is a every week play for me, dare I say. I picked him up off of waivers in a couple of leagues once Joe Flacco started playing a little bit, and that paid its dividends very nicely. I have a lot of faith in Josh Downs going forward. I'll go with him as well. And that's as a big Shakir guy. Shakir might be the only player I drafted more of than Nico Collins this year. Still, I think I'll take Downs.
Yeah, and I want to touch on Anthony Richardson a little bit because we kind of brought that conversation up about his low completion percentage. Watching the film, you could see he had a lot of drops on his receivers' ends. He threw some pretty balls, and receivers were just not in the right place. I don't think this is solely an Anthony Richardson problem. I think it's a receivers struggling to get open problem. One, receivers struggling to run the right routes problem, and a receivers catching the ball problem as well. Obviously, his accuracy could use some work because how does Joe Flacco step in and just kind of run this offense the way he wants to? But there is a serious problem with the receivers on this team and their ability to separate. I think really what they're missing, and maybe this is like selfish of me to say, is kind of like tight end who can take advantage of like those type of mismatches. I couldn't even tell you who the starting tight end right now. Maybe Kylan Granson on a week-to-week basis. Maybe it's Mo Alley Cox at this point. I'm not sure. But if they had Jelani Woods, who is one of my favorite players going into the season, who, again, is missing the entire season for whatever injury he has now. If they had Jelani Woods, I think that would have been a good boost for this offense, selfishly.
I knew where that was going. The second you said, I think what this offense is missing is, I knew where that was going.
But and it's kind of true, right? Because like you don't have like Josh Downs has been the closest thing to a safety net for this team, and still he's running a variety of routes. Like if you have a guy like Jelani Woods who is going to easily beat that soft coverage in the middle of the field, linebackers and so forth, that's a big boost to this offense. They need that kind of guy in this offense. So if the Colts Don't get Jelani Woods back healthy at any point. I think they need to invest in a top tight end, or at least a tight end who could be a consistent part of this offense. It doesn't have to be someone in the draft. It could be free agent, whatever. I digress. But that being said, let's jump into our players. Since it's been the topic of conversation for about 5-10 minutes at this point, I guess I'll just go into Josh Downs. He is my start of the week this week, if we're foreshadowing it that way. But he's going against Minnesota. He's got Joe Flacco as his quarterback this week. Josh Downs is going against a Minnesota defense that has allowed the second most receiving yards in the league to wide receivers, the second most touchdowns to wide receivers, also the second most receptions to wide receivers, the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And on top of that, the Minnesota Vikings run too high coverage more than any other team in the entire league. It's about a 70% rate. Josh Downs has the second highest targets per route run against too high coverage. So he sees a ton of volume when he's going against this formation of defense. On top of all of that, right? They're 5.5 point underdogs going to this game, the Colts. So this is a game where they're probably going to have to pass the ball a good amount. Josh Downs has about as good as a matchup that you could hope for. I think he's going to smash this week. So big fan of Josh Downs going into this matchup and really down the line for the remainder of the season, depending on those matchups with Joe Flacco. But who is your first player? If you want to go, but you mentioned before Khalil Shakir and all that. So why don't we just keep it going with that kind of talk? Tell me about your players.
And I mean, we also mentioned Darnell Mooney before, who'll be my next guy. But I will start with Amari Cooper and this Bills situation. And this is actually going to be a less positive conversation. Amari Cooper, I feel like still hasn't really settled in yet. I mean, that whole clip of Keon Coleman showing him the route that he had to run, and then he caught the touchdown in that first game was pretty cool and all. And then last week, Josh Allen threw the ball 34 times, which is a lot for Josh Allen's passing volume has not been all that high this year. And 34 times last week is a decent amount of pass attempts for Allen. Cooper had 2 targets. And I'm not necessarily throwing blame at the player here. Like, it's a new situation. It's tough. He's going to take some time to learn and all. I'm just saying that until he does learn and until he shows that he's a part of this offense now, I think there are safer options to play, being guys like Khalil Shakir, who has taken a step up, as you mentioned, since Cooper got there. Again, 2 targets last week on 34 pass attempts is not very encouraging. And as a person who has Amari Cooper in a bunch of leagues, I'm trying my best to find better options that are safer for this week.
And I hardly pat myself on the back. Luke knows this. I try not to because I just hate the way it sounds.
Public.
And humbly, yes. At the end of the day, this is an unpredictable game, and we're just kind of having our fun with it. But I was a big component on selling Amari Cooper after him signing with the Bills. I did not think did I think he was going to be this bad? No. But I didn't think that wide receiver meets Josh Allen and it automatically translates to wide receiver 1. People were calling him a top 10 wide receiver the rest of the season, top 12 even. And the first post that I made after Amari Cooper got traded to the Bills was selling high in Amari Cooper in our buy sell post each week. And we got a lot of flack for that. But ultimately, look, I mean, like as you said, he's just I don't know what his plan is for this offense. This has always been an offense, even last year with Joe Brady, once he took over, this has been an offense that really disperses the ball to a variety of receivers, and I do not think that's going to change with Amari Cooper in town. As I mentioned before, it helps other guys scheme open, and that's great, and that's what they're going to take advantage of, because Josh Allen's going to look to take advantage of the best matchup. He's not going to force the ball to the worst matchup, and that's unfortunately just the name of the game with Amari Cooper. So hopefully he can turn it around a little bit more, but I would be not looking to start him until we kind of see that come to fruition. My next player is Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton going against the Baltimore Ravens, who are allowing the most fantasy points to perimeter wide receivers through the entire season. They're also allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. Sutton is coming off an 11-target game. The Ravens have also allowed the most touchdowns to wide receivers this season, and the Denver Broncos go into this game as 9.5 point underdogs. Again, another situation where this is a bad defense allowing a lot of points to receivers. Courtland Sutton's coming off, as I mentioned, an 11-target game. 9.5 point underdogs is going to have to throw. I think this is just a cakewalk matchup for Sutton to kind of repeat, similar to what he had the week before. You can look at Sutton's numbers. I think it was 2 weeks ago at this point when they played against the Saints. The Broncos scored a ton of points, and Sutton came away with absolutely nothing. But at the same time, it's a blowout game. I really don't take too much away from that. So, yeah, Sutton this week, I would say he's a pretty surefire start. I'm going to be starting him in just about every league that I have him in. Luke, tell me about Darnell Mooney.
Yeah, playing against the Cowboys this week, I'm trusting Vegas on this one. They have this total at almost 52 points, by far the highest in the league this week, and for good reason. Neither of these defenses have been particularly good, and the Cowboys' defense especially has really not looked good. I mean, I'm not going to come on here and say start Bijan Robinson. That's no fun and doesn't provide you guys with any value, but I think he's going to run absolutely wild on the Cowboys this week. But these games where the Falcons are scoring, 30 points plus, Kirk Cousins has been getting everybody involved. I mean, both of these running backs produce in these types of games. Drake London especially. I think Drake London's like the wide receiver 6 right now. And he is really doing that on the back of like 2 or 3 games where the Falcons have 35 points and he has 2 touchdowns and 150 yards. But it's just outside of him too. Kyle Pitts and Darnell Mooney also get involved in these games. Kirk Cousins has been airing it out in these sort of shootout games. I'm trusting the odds here. I'm trusting that this is going to be a high-scoring game. And if that's the case, I think Darnell Mooney's status increases from weekly borderline flex to solid wide receiver 2 play this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those matches where both teams are going to sling it. I think CeeDee Lamb should be the surefire wide receiver 1 this week going into a shootout. Darnell Mooney, as you mentioned, also a good play. On that topic, are there any other Cowboys outside of CeeDee Lamb that you're kind of excited about going into this game? Because I've seen some rumblings on Twitter. People are excited for Rico Dowdle in this game to kind of show up in a big way. I mean, Dalvin Cook didn't give them anything last week. Ezekiel Elliott at this point is a shell of what he used to be. Is there a chance Rico Dowdle comes in and he's legitimately like a great start this week? I don't know. I know the Falcons haven't been great against the run, but I don't know if I'm willing to put all my chips into that basket.
Yeah, I mean, the Cowboys offense just really has disappointed to this point. As you said, the other running backs there appear to be washed. So I think Dowdle has the opportunity. I don't know if he's the player that's going to make these explosive plays and pop off big runs, even against a weaker defense that's exhausted and giving up a ton of points. Again, the state of this running back market, probably having Dowdle in my lineup this week, but I don't know if I'm expecting some sort of 30-point outburst.
Yeah, if this was 2017, they might have the best backfield in the league, but unfortunately, it's 2024 for those folks. I'm going to get into my last player here today, which is Cade Otton. He's been an absolute beast over the last few weeks, and he gets a matchup against the Chiefs, who are allowing the most receiving yards to tight ends this season. The Chiefs have been good all around when it comes to defending quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs. Their weakness this season has been tight end. They're allowing the most fantasy points to the position per game. Cade Otton has also been the tight end 1 over the last 2 weeks. And the Buccaneers are 8.5 point underdogs, which I think is a pretty big number. 8.5 points below the Chiefs, who have really kind of squeaked out each game that they've been in. I don't think I've seen the Chiefs blow anyone out this season. Even last week against the Raiders, 27-20 in a game I think they should have walked away without a scratch. But regardless, Cade Otton, and I bring this up to yes, he's an obvious start, but a lot of people might have Cade Otton as their second tight end this week, and I think that's a mistake because I really cannot think of a tight end that I would rather start over Cade Otton this week. I don't know if you have one, if you can come up with one, because Trey McBride has been very consistent, but still, the upside of Cade Otton, 100 yards, 10, 11 targets, I don't know. I kind of feel like you have to roll with him no matter what. Are you in agreement on that, or is there another tight end that you're like, well, I might start this guy over?
Can't think of one off the top of my head. I mean, we were just talking about the Cowboys. I think Jake Ferguson probably has a good week in this game, but the upside does not compare. Cade Otton does not have CeeDee Lamb to compete with. As a matter of fact, he doesn't have anything to compete with except Rachaad White out of the backfield, I guess, who's been really like their wide receiver too the past few weeks. And now I'm looking at the injury reports. I saw Sterling Shepard is dealing with an injury now. He's like their wide receiver 5. I don't know who else they have to throw the ball to. The upside on Cade Otton is unmatched. Like, definitely get him in your lineup this week for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Who is your last player?
This guy is probably my start of the week. It's Jaxon Smith-Njigba. To this point, DK Metcalf hasn't practiced this week. We'll see if he logs that important Friday practice, but he didn't practice on Wednesday or Thursday. We'll see. Assuming he misses this game, JSN is going in my lineups. He is 8th in the league in targets to this point this season, playing against a Rams secondary that hasn't performed all that well. I mean, their big signing in the offseason was Tre'Davious White. He's been benched. He's not been what they had hoped for, and the secondary's really been getting gashed. They've been the Rams defense has really been getting carried by that sort of young, revamped defensive line. They're playing all right. They're definitely the strongest part of this defense, but I think even with a Seahawks offensive line that's struggling, Geno Smith's been airing the ball out. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, again, 8th in the league in targets. I think he has 62 on the year. And with probably no DK Metcalf to compete with, I think he's going to be the guy this week.
Okay, so let me give you a little this or that. Assuming DK doesn't play, right? JSN or Devontae Smith?
I don't have the matchups in front of me. I actually don't know who the Eagles play this week.
Jaguars.
Okay. I think I'd start JSN.
Okay. JSN or Courtland Sutton, who I mentioned is going against the Ravens.
I mean, I guess I'll plant my flag on JSN. I don't some sort of competition, but
okay. And last one, JSN or Terry McLaurin going against the Giants.
Yeah, I think I actually considered talking about Terry this week, but I decided it would be a little too obvious, considering he's been a top 10 fantasy receiver to this point, playing against the Giants, who have been in and out of benching their alleged cornerback 1 in Deonte Banks.
Alleged.
We saw what happened last week. I mean, he got benched against the Steelers, and they had a couple practice squad guys covering George Pickens the rest of the game. Did not exactly go well. They got torched by George Pickens. They got torched by Van Jefferson. They got torched by Calvin Austin. Terry McLaurin, definitely get in your lineup.
All right. I respect it. And George Pickens should have had like 2 or 3 touchdowns that game. It just, the way the penalties worked out, it just didn't happen, but it's okay. So, all right. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching. As always, please remember to like and subscribe. That makes me happy. Also, what makes me happy is going on Underdog and using code ANALYST. Get that $1,000 deposit bonus. And we'll see you guys next week.